All right, we're going to kick off quickly, but as we do, I just wanted to let everyone know I am Alana Pearson. I'm our communications director here at Represent Women. For those of you who joined our Solutions Summit last month, welcome back. This is a very exciting night, as not only are we talking about a very important issue, the Voting Rights Act, but also it is our inaugural event in our Democracy Solutions series. And this series is something that it's a brand new continuation of the summit where we recognize that there were a lot of topics that we discussed during our 3-day summit that did not get the time and dedication to them that they really deserved. And that was done intentionally, and that we wanted to give people a brief overview of what the VRA was, what the ERA is. And what we're able to do now is have longer 1-hour webinars that allow us to dive deeper, bring in additional experts, and really give it that time and space to go one step further with everyone who joined the summit, at least having some understanding of what the VRA is and why Represent Women cares about it. So, Katie, is the slides good to go?
Coming in hot.
Sweet. All right. So quickly, I'm going to just skim through our little slide deck at the top of this webinar. As I know for some people, it may be Voting Rights Act, women's representation, how do they intersect? Why are we talking about this tonight? So really wanted to level set why this is such an important conversation to set the stage for our incredible panelists who will be diving in a little bit deeper and answering your questions throughout the rest of this hour-long evening. So to let everyone first know, hopefully you know who Represent Women is, but if this is your first time interacting with us, Represent Women is a national nonpartisan organization that has spent more than a decade tracking the systems and structural levers that increase women's representation in elected office. And we are focused tonight on the Voting Rights Act because voting rights and representation are inseparable. Our research makes this conclusion clear. And when the safeguards against discrimination and vote dilution are strong, women, particularly women of color, are more likely to participate, run for office, and win. But when those safeguards are weak, the effects ripple outward. And that is why we are here having this conversation tonight. So to give a brief background for those who don't know what the Voting Rights Act is, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is one of the most consequential pieces of civil rights legislation in the American history. And at its core, it affirms something fundamental. The right to vote must be paired with a meaningful opportunity to be represented. And securing the ballot is the floor. It is not the ceiling. And for nearly 60 years, it has ensured that communities, regardless of race, color, or background, have a fair opportunity to elect candidates who reflect their interest. And today, unfortunately, those protections face unprecedented challenges. So as we were saying, why the VRA and why women? And so again, I just kind of reiterated this in the last slide, but the voting rights protections and representation are deeply interconnected. And we're going to go through that briefly here and show where the impacts of rollbacks to the VRA would impact women in different states, how state VRAs are helping safeguard these. And so we're going to just go next to the next slide quickly to talk about the ways that they matter for women. So just at the highest of levels, we care about this because vote dilution is a women's issue. Election structures can allow people to cast ballots, but they can also still prevent communities from translating their vote into representation. And women, as it's saying here, especially women of color, have historically been among those who've been most affected by these structural dynamics. And at Represent Women, we care very much about structural systems and the structural levers and solutions to help ensure that everyone has a meaningful vote and is represented. And to solve for these gaps in representation, we also at Represent Women look toward proportional remedies to expand opportunities. So proportional representation is something that we look at Represent Women as one of those options to expand representation. And also, we just want to note that language access and participation provisions protect the most vulnerable. And so we also want to ensure that the barriers that sometimes disproportionately affect caregivers, older women, and women in language minorities communities are addressed. And when participation is limited, women's leadership is often the first to be excluded. So we want to ensure that all of these areas are addressed through our solutions, and I'm sure our speakers will also talk about these areas tonight. And one woman that I really want to highlight, this photo is our fabulous executive director, Cynthia Ritchie-Terrell, with Lonnie Guinier. And for those of you who don't know who Lonnie Guinier is, she was a civil rights attorney and one of the most transformative thinkers in voting rights history. She has truly been behind so many of the advances that we have seen. She was a civil rights attorney, she was a Harvard law professor, and a transformative thinker within our history of voting rights. She believed, as I was saying, that the universal suffrage was the floor and not the ceiling. And she has spent her entire career pushing us toward what a genuine political equality would look like. She was instrumental in the 1982 amendments to the VRA. She championed proportional representation, which, as I mentioned in my last slide, is a tool to break through what she called the tyranny of the majority. And her vision was truly prophetic. And it lives in the work that we do today. She was a friend to this organization, and we are just very proud and honored to carry her work forward tonight. So if you don't know much about Lonnie Guinier, there is a fabulous video that Represent Women made a couple of years ago that we will drop in the comments so you can listen through and learn a little bit more about her and what she meant by the tyranny of the majority. All right, so just placing it in today, as I said, why do we care about this? What are we talking about and what's at stake? So jumping to the slide. So just taking a step back, what does the data tell us about women office holders and majority minority districts now? So according to Ballotpedia, this map is great. My colleague, our research director, Courtney, created this for us. There are 148 majority minority districts in the United States. Across 28 states, which is pictured here. And just to give us a visual, 54 of these districts, or 36%, are currently represented by women. So not a small amount. Why does this matter though? So it matters today. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, Katie. Uh, Unfortunately, right now we are still pending and waiting for the results of a Supreme Court case, Louisiana v. Callais, which many people have likely heard about. It's been all across the news. And we've gotten a lot of questions from people on what is the Supreme Court case. I'm a bit out of the loop. So in a very brief sense, I will walk us through what this case is looking at, and the speakers today will also speak about the implications. But after Louisiana drew a congressional map giving Black voters, who are 1/3 of the state's population, the opportunity to elect their preferred candidate in only one of 6 districts, years of litigation has led to a court-ordered remedy, and that remedy was challenged, and the case went to the Supreme Court. So now the court has narrowed its focus to whether creating a majority-minority district violates the Constitution, putting Section 2 of the VRA itself in the crosshairs. So a ruling against it could be one of the most significant rollbacks of the Voting Rights Act since Shelby County v. Holder in 2013, and it is a very important case to follow. So if you have not read up on it, I highly suggest taking some time to learn a little bit more about what this case could mean, and we'll go into that tonight as well. So looking at a map, at Represent Women, we have really been wondering, well, what will happen if Section 2 gets rolled back and how will it impact women? And so Courtney created this incredible map. I don't know if it exists elsewhere, so it is a very helpful map for us to really see how these districts could impact women. So of the 11 states most likely to face redistricting pressure, up to 36 majority minority districts could be redrawn. And 12 of these districts are currently represented by women in the House of Representatives. So that will have a direct, or could have a direct, implication on women should this get rolled back. So it's very important for us to be looking at and seeing how this could impact women nationwide. So While that isn't great news, there is a silver lining. Even in this moment of threat, there is momentum. California, New York, Oregon, Virginia, Connecticut, Washington, Minnesota, Colorado, and Maryland have all passed state voting rights acts, and advocates are pushing for more. Just this year, our team has submitted both verbal and written testimony before committees in Vermont supporting their efforts to pass a state voting rights act. So there is progress being made. Just Maryland this week passed their own state voting rights act. So this is just a very important and timely topic for us to be covering. And at Represent Women, we care about advancing state voting rights act because it helps increase women's participation and representation, especially for women of color and other historically excluded minorities, communities. And these laws go further than the federal VRA, and many include proportional remedies that, again, our research shows are most effective at advancing women's representation. And we're very grateful to have Delegate Marcia Price, who carried Virginia's VRA here with us tonight. And so we're excited to include her voice in this conversation. So, with so much at stake that we've just discussed in a very brief way, I will pass along these slides to everyone in an email after so you can spend some more time digesting the maps, as well as our newly created Voting Rights Act website page to learn a little bit more about the work that we are focused on. I really want to switch over to questions with our great group of panelists tonight. So, to introduce them, we have April Albright returning again. For those of you who joined our Solution Summit, April was a fabulous panelist that spoke very eloquently and in great depth, as much as she could in the 25 minutes, which is why we wanted to bring her back for this conversation today about the Voting Rights Act. And April Albright is of Black Voters Matter. She's the legal director and acting chief of staff at the Black Voters Matter Fund, where she leads voter protection litigation and restorative justice work focused on building power in Black and marginalized communities. The rest of her bio, Katie will drop, but April, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello,
And
everyone.
yeah, thank you, April. And next we have Delegate Marcia Price, affectionately known as Sia. She is serving in her sixth term in the Virginia House of Delegates. She represents the 85th District, where she was born and raised. And in 2024, she was the first Black woman appointed as the chair of the House Privileges and Elections Committee, which is the longest continuously committee in the nation's history. She also serves on the Health and Human Services Committee and is the chair of the Health Professions Subcommittee. And she also is the proud sponsor of the 2021 Voting Rights Act of Virginia. So we're excited to chat a little bit more about that today. Thank you so much for being here, Delegate Price.
Thank you for having me.
And last but certainly not least, we have Yael Bromberg, who is a constitutional rights and voting rights litigator and a leading legal scholar of the 26th Amendment. Yael teaches democracy law at American University Washington College of Law. She is also the co-editor and co-author of a fabulous new book, Youth Voting Rights, Civil Rights and the 26th Amendment, and the Future of American Democracy on College Campuses. So if you've not purchased this book, if you've not looked at this book, I always want to give it a shout out. We'll definitely pass that link around in our email as well so you can get your own copy. It is a great resource. So thank you so much for being here tonight to chat with us. I want to first open up a question to all of the panelists. And so we are at a pivotal moment for voting rights in this country, as we stated in our slides. And the graphics show that we could have some really serious implications if Section 2 is rolled back. So I'm hoping that each of you, can you briefly share why you felt it was important to be part of this conversation today and what has you most concerned or most hopeful right now? And I will let anyone go who wants to jump in first.
So I'm going to jump in because I'm going to probably have to go at some point because I got to catch a flight. But I think I've joined a lot of conversations on this topic because I don't think that because our lives are busy and there's so much happening in the world that I don't believe we fully understand and are aware of what's actually happening and what the impact will be. And then more importantly, what we can do about it, right? Because things happen as they have happened in this country. That's never stopped good organizing and good activism. So that's why I felt this conversation was important.
Well, thank you. We are so grateful to have you here. Delegate Price, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, sure. And good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. But I first learned deeply about the Voting Rights Act when I was in high school in the IB program. And I did my extended essay on it. And just really, that was the spark that got me interested in learning more about how voting rights impact communities that have been marginalized. And then now, look, however many years later, I am a delegate. And so if that means that a conversation tonight could educate someone to why they should also be passionate about it and help get them into the game and tap in whatever way they can. And if I can lend my voice to saving our democracy, I will be there and do that. So thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so grateful to have you here. And Yael,
Well, it's wonderful to join you all and to be with such esteemed co-panelists. And I always love Represent Women and everything that y'all are doing. So anytime Represent Women is bringing women's voices together, I am there for that because we're so powerful. And this democracy is really going to depend on all of us. And we know that women have a different approach, which we were just talking about. So, for me, especially as a voting rights attorney and a scholar, practitioner, and doer of scholar and practitioner of the 26th Amendment, I'm very encouraged, right? And I'm encouraged because we know how to reconstruct. We've this country has gone through two reconstructions. A lot of people talk about, are we in the third reconstruction now? That might be optimistic, right? But I think that we need to answer that call. Are we in the midst of a third reconstruction? And if we are, or if we're not, what are we doing about it? And I think that is kind of for me, it is the call of the moment for the next maybe 10 to 15 years. And so as a student of constitutional rights and history, and as an immigrant and a Jewish American, I know what happens when fascism wins. We know what the repercussions of that are. And we are seeing a real threat of authoritarianism in this country and abroad. And we have certain recent elections, like the recent election that ousted Viktor Orban just a few days ago. So we can go on these wins of success and change, but it requires a lot of non-glamorous work. And as women, we know how to dig into that. And that's why I'm here.
well, thank you. That was, I think, a little dose of hope that I needed and probably a lot of people needed. And I'd love to come back to you to talk a little bit more about what you would envision this third reconstruction to look like. So hold there. I'm going to just jump quickly to April because I know you do have a flight to catch and I don't want to keep you for too long. But as I've been doing research on the Voting Rights Act, I've actually very much found the Black Voters Matter Fund and the Fair Action Report really helpful in my research. And so it describes Louisiana v. Callais as potentially the most significant rollback of voting rights since Shelby County v. Holder. So I'm hoping, could you just walk us through what Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act does and what's at stake in this case that you're seeing and concerned about, and what a ruling against it could mean for communities across the country? I think people aren't sure how this would actually impact their community. And if you could give some insights, that would be great.
Yes. And so, the Voting Rights Act is probably, especially for marginalized communities in this country, it's one of the most consequential. It's about as close to a constitutional amendment as it, relating to democracy as you can get, right? Because sometimes people look at the Constitution and say, well, my goodness, you have the 13th, you got the 14th, and you got the 15th Amendment. What else do you need, right? And I think we don't know historically that, when I ask people sometimes when I'm doing presentations, and my husband often asks sometimes, when did Black people or Black men in particular get the right to vote? Most people attribute it to the Voting Rights Act. They'll say in 1965, when in fact it was not in 1965, right? It was in the 15th Amendment that happened in the 1800s as a part of the second, the Reconstruction that we just referenced. But so here are these powerful amendments, yet it took centuries for rights to be bestowed, on the most marginalized people. And now we find today the very amendment that brought in and ushered in that protection and these monumental laws now in of itself is being used to deny those rights to the very people that it was designed and engineered to protect. And that's the moment that we're in. We're in a moment where without such an act, without that guardrail, which is what Section 2 is, because your question was, what is Section 2 and what does it really do? It gives us a very important guardrail. And it's extremely important now in light of the fact that the Supreme Court in the Shelby case that you mentioned earlier, right, gutted two of the most powerful provisions that allowed for some of the things that we see today never see the light of day. We lost that pre-clearance power. And so all we have now is Section 2 to litigate our concerns when you see racial gerrymandering and efforts in the states to minimize and dilute the power of marginalized voters, Black voters in particular. And so what does that look like? That means that you got districts, right, where some states will draw lines and pack all the marginalized people in one space. And then you have other maps that spread us out, right? So either way, you're limiting the ability of those communities to have representation. And because America is a representative democracy, without having that voice and that vital representation, you really don't have a say-so in who does those and where the money goes in this country to provide the quality of life that you want. And so what we caution people, because I don't want to go over to so many details in the report because you did such a great job up front, but I want to say that what I want people to take away from the reports is that this is not just a federal issue, right? Every time we have the census, which is coming very, very soon, you have state delegates, right? Like you have county commissioners, you have all these different places that are drawing maps in order to have your representation heard. So it's not just what happens in DC, although it's very important, it's also what's happening at the state level, right? Because the Voting Rights Act governs what happens even there. So when you're talking about your county commission and you want to make sure that your roads can get changed, that your local school infrastructure has the facilities and the resources it needs, that's where those decisions are. So the Voting Rights Act or its denial or lack of existence could impact you all the way down to your neighborhood. And so when we're talking about the Voting Rights Act and the Callais decision and what's at stake, that's what we're talking about.
Thank you. I think that will hopefully clarify for a lot of people and make it real. Like, this is not just a high level thing that won't impact me. No, it will impact your community. It will impact your school board and your city council. And we need to really start framing it in that way. So thank you, April. And speaking of the states and how it impacts the states, I'm going to pass it over to you, Delegate Price. Just if you want to add anything to what April was saying, we obviously look at states as a safeguard. We may lose some protections, but it doesn't mean all hope is lost. States have been able to take action. So if you wanted to speak a little bit about what Virginia has done and any thoughts you have there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Virginia was the first state in the South to have our own Voting Rights Act, and that occurred in 2021. And it was really a labor of love. It was woman-led. So I was the chief patron, and then I worked with NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Advancement Project. There were other lawyers that were at the table, and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and other lawyers that were at the table, but it was all women. And so we would go out and just try and get a lot of information on what was happening in Virginia. And we tapped into the folks that were running the voter protection hotline. And they had a picture of what all were the complaints and the systems that were failing and how they were failing people across the nation. So we were like, all right, well, let's do a bill that tightens up those, right? So we did base it a lot on the framework of the Federal Voting Rights Act prior to being gutted in the Eric v. Holder case. I'm sorry, the 2013 case against Holder.
Shelby
And
Beholder, yeah.
thank you,
Yeah.
Shelby B. Holder. And then also some things that we knew Virginia communities needed. So we have language access. So if you have uh, like a certain percentage of language for language speakers in an area, that area has to have ballots available in that language, right? And voter registration forms, all of that, anything that they put out. We made sure that the local voting districts were fair. So if you're going from wards to at large, will that negatively impact people? We had some protections against voter intimidation and also accountability for disinformation. So that's like an actual thing you can't do, or you could get sued. And then we very, 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 very importantly allowed for affected voters, disenfranchised voters, or the attorney general to be able to sue if they were impacted. And the fact that that was not able to be done before 2021 is bonkers, but also now it's really important. So you move forward. Other thing. Instead of doing a pre-clearance process for the areas that were historically involved in racial disenfranchisement, we established a list of covered practices. So like moving a polling place, or these things that folks could do, and match that up with a list of protected classes. So, especially Black neighborhoods, communities of color. And so if you were going to do one of these things and it impacted negatively one of these groups, then you can't do it. Or if you are going to do it and you're not sure, you could have public comment, and it had to be known in the public for 30 days. And that allowed for lawyers to attack it or whatever. So we were hearing other places where polling precincts were being moved into the building where the sheriff's office still was, or, where ICE was known to congregate, and all of these things. So it's like, that is voter disenfranchisement. So we made that first statewide. So just in case you didn't have a history of it, that you're not going to have a future of it either. So we wanted to make sure that was done. And then this year, so 2021 is when it passed. Then this year, I passed another bill that the governor just signed that makes some of these protections even stronger now that since 2021, we've seen some other shenanigans going on. And it exists, like, say, for instance, we had a threshold of, if you have 5% of, let's say, Spanish speakers, you had to have those ballots. We lowered that to 3% so that more localities would be included. You can be a disenfranchised voter, the AG, or an organization working on their behalf that could take legal action for them. And so all of this exists now. The new changes to it will take effect July 1st. But I want to be very clear on the state level. It's not just the Voting Rights Act of Virginia. It was also more than 40 bills that rolled back obstacles to voting that previous legislatures had passed. So we got rid of photo ID and have voter ID. We have Saturday and Sunday voting. We have it's a long list. I'll just say we went from number 48 ranked and an ease of voting to 11th. And it was because of all of this work we did. And we could only have done it because of advocates and advocacy and lawyers and much like the organizations that you all are working with. So just imagine, so let's say you're sitting in Georgia or Florida right now and you're like, oh, that could never happen here because of today. Just imagine if 10 years before 2021, Virginians had said that and never did the groundwork, we wouldn't have been ready for 2021. So even if this becomes like a dream for the future, you still got to do the groundwork so that when the people wake up and things are shifting, when that shift actually occurs, you're ready to hit. And so Virginia, we want to be a beacon of democracy, but we don't want to be alone in the South, right? We want other Southern states to join us with one.
Oh my gosh, that was incredible. I knew pieces of that story, Delegate Price, but I did not know all of it. I mean, how you worked for so many years on this and continue to expand it. I mean, truly, we talk about playing the long game and really, you might not have an immediate win right now, but you're building towards something. That is just the perfect example of like in Virginia, you played the long game, and now you've decreased so many of the barriers and increased representation. That is wonderful. And thank you for speaking to the language aspect of it. Before really looking into the Voting Rights Act, I didn't realize, and I don't think many, that language barriers are something that are truly important to focus on. And so
Absolutely.
thank you for speaking to that and how
And I'm
3% is
sorry,
so
I
much
just want to
better.
add one more thing just to
Yeah.
give a pretty picture of representation. So, we now currently have today in the Virginia General Assembly the most women ever, and serving in the House and the Senate, to include the most women in positions of power, including the Senate president and lots of committee chairs. But specific to Black women, I just want to say the first Black woman to ever serve in the Virginia General Assembly happened in my lifetime. And now we've had 36 Black women serve, 16 of which are serving right now. And we've also had more Hispanic, AAPI, Muslim, Jewish, all kinds of different women that are serving. And so it's not disconnected, right? So I just wanted to make that point on the connection of
Yeah.
representation as well.
Oh my gosh, thank you for making that connection. I have a feeling that there is another webinar in our future where we can get some more of these women to talk to us about their experience, because this is just such a great template, right? We can copy and paste this, slight variations per state, but this doesn't have to just be a Virginia thing, as you were saying. So this is so exciting. Now, yeah, I don't want to leave you in the lurch. I want to make sure we get over to you as well with some questions. So we're talking a lot about the state implications, the federal implications of the Voting Rights Act. But I just kind of want to first center it for you. The court is obviously being asked right now to decide whether considering race to remedy proven racial discrimination is in and of itself unconstitutional. Could you take a second to explain that legal argument to everyday people? I know April talked a little bit about it, but how does it square with the original intent of the 14th and 15th Amendment? Like, can you kind of put it all together for people who might not be as in the loop?
Sure. Well, I can go through kind of the story of what happened in Calais, but let's just we've acknowledged the significance of the 2013 Shelby holding, right? So that holding means that Section 4 and Section 5 of the VRA are not currently operable because the Supreme Court held that the coverage formula for the states that had to go and get permission before implementing voting changes was out of date. And so now it's called pre-clearance. There's no pre-clearance. You can't propose a law, have it be checked before being implemented. Now it'll automatically go through. So that means that sections 4 and sections 5, even though it really just went after section 4, is on pause. I'm not going to say it's out. I'm going to say it's on pause. So the only other real section that we have, I mean, there's also section 3, and there are other aspects of it, but the main section, the other meaty part of the VRA, is section 2. And so what section 2 provides is that it prohibits state and local governments from using voting procedures that result is key, in denial or abridgment of the right to vote on account of race or color. Okay, so that was an intentional modification in 1982 to the Voting Rights Act to make it results based. So we're looking at effects of implementation of laws. And it is, Alana, a bit of I think there's a perversity to the question being presented to the US Supreme Court now, because it basically is saying that if you have a race-conscious remedy to cure a racial discriminatory law, is that violative of the 14th and 15th Amendment? And the purpose of the 14th and 15th Amendment are race-conscious remedies, right? They were passed, they were ratified in the wake of the Civil War, during the nation's first Reconstruction, where we eradicated the institution of slavery, we established equal right under law, and we outlawed race-based discrimination with access to the ballot. And so the purpose of the 14th and 15th Amendment were race-conscious remedies to the institution of slavery. So now that we're kind of fast forwarding 250 years after the founding of the nation to say, is a race-conscious remedy violative of the 14th and 15th Amendment? That is a that is a perverse question, because the purpose of the 14th and 15th Amendment were race consciousness in voter access. And I'll also put it in another way. The language of the 14th Amendment doesn't directly necessarily talk about race. It talks about equal protection under law, right? And the VRA built off of that, right? And so underscoring all of this is not just discrimination against voters of color. It is discrimination against every single aspect with regard to equal protection of equal treatment of the ballot. And so the question before Callais, I think we have to kind of anchor it in what is the purpose of Section 2, what was the purpose of the 14th, 15th Amendment, especially now that we don't have Section 5, and pursuant to Shelby. And it is important also to remember that it was only 2 years ago that the Supreme Court upheld Section 2, right, in a sister redistricting case out of Alabama, where the Supreme Court upheld the drawing of a second congressional district pursuant to Section 2. So are they going to tell us 2 years later that that precedent is not going to hold, that fundamental premise was invalid? You know, the jury's out. We are waiting for the decision. Probably it will be some type of a narrow ruling. It is very curious because the case held argument and then held a re-argument on which is rare for the Supreme Court to request supplemental briefing. But really, what caused all of this? After the 2020 census, it determined that there would be 6 congressional districts drawn of the total voter population in Louisiana. And the 2020 census also illustrated that a third of the state consisted of Black voters. And so the question presented was, are we going to have one of 6 majority minority Black districts, which, by the way, would comprise one of 6, I did the math, is 16%, right? Or are we going to have 2 of 6, i.e. 33% of majority? So this is really about having a reflective and multiracial democracy that's proportional and reflective of the voting and residential population. So that's really what's at stake in Callais, but I think it's even more than the VRA. I think it's threatening the actual premise of equal protection under law.
Yeah, that's a really helpful context for those that maybe weren't following it as closely. And before we get too far from the first thought that you had, would you mind, as talking about that third reconstruction that we may be in, that you were kind of starting to discuss at the beginning, and what would that look like to you? If we are in this period, we have a chance to make a difference or change the trajectory. If you had a magic wand, what would you like to see for this period of time that we're in to ensure that these protections are upheld?
So I have a few immediate proposals.
Yeah, love to hear them.
Delegate Price, let's dream up together. So, I think that we need to pass the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, for women. We need to eradicate the Electoral College. We need to pass DC statehood, right? We need to pass a congressional act to fulfill just like the VRA was passed for the 14th and 15th Amendment, we need to pass a bill that I authored called the Youth Voting Rights Act to fulfill the promise of the 26th Amendment, the Youth Voting Rights Amendment. I think that that's a starting point. And we also have to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act itself, long past due. It's very easy. I teach election law and the political process. It is very easy to forget that the VRA has been reauthorized multiple times across party lines. So we are in a moment of extreme partisan polarization, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it wasn't traditionally that way. Other aspects, I think, like more open embrace of alternate voting systems like RCV. I think that that's kind of a no-brainer here. Passing a 28th, you asked me, Alana, so I'm just going to go.
Yes.
Passing a 28th Amendment. There's a great proposal. I'm a proud member on the cross-partisan advisory board of an organization called American Promise. And they put together a proposal to remove the role of money in politics and overturn Citizens United. So we need to do kind of a holistic wraparound approach to re-envision re-envisioning democracy. I think those are starting points.
Those are great starting points, and they're actually tangible, actions that we can take. And we also partner with American Promise in some democracy movement things, and so I think they're a great organization as well. I have a couple of questions that are starting to filter in, so if you do have them from the audience, please feel free to continue adding them to the Q&A. But one of our individuals has said, "Why isn't it argued as equal protections under the law?" Not sure if you can speak to this.
Why isn't Callais argued that way?
I would assume that that's what it's in reference to.
Yeah. So the challenge in Callais was brought by non-Black voters. If I remember correctly, they were brought from, I might be missing it with the Milligan case, but they were non-Black voters from outside of the voting district. And the challenge is they're arguing that their 14th Amendment rights were violated by the drawing of a second majority district by the state legislature. So also consider the fact that the state of Louisiana is a defendant in this case, justifying the drawing of the second congressional district. So sometimes when you bring a case, you'll bring it both on 14th Amendment grounds and the VRA because they're mutually enforceable. They're mutually intertwined.
No, that's very helpful context. And hopefully, Lee, that answers your question that you proposed in the chat. April, before you go, I just had a quick question for you. If you're able, are you good to answer one, or is now not a good time?
No, I can. I'm in the car though, but okay, I can.
You're my hero, multitasking queen. I just wanted to check in with you. We've had some questions about communities right now that are bearing the brunt of attacks on voting rights. And we talked a little bit about that. But, how are communities right now experiencing these threats right now? If you could just speak a little bit more to the communities you serve and what you're seeing, like what's the response on the ground? How are people feeling? What are ways that people maybe in our community right now could also help take action at this time?
Well, of course, if you're in a state like Virginia, you can go vote. Right? You can go vote. You can go to the polls and you can vote in more protections, into law. And so if you're in one of those states, if you're living in Virginia right now and you're tuning in and you have family or friends, you can encourage them to go and vote yes, right? Because that is, the Constitution is not, the 13th and 14th Amendment was never meant to be the ceiling, it's the floor. And so we can continue to build in the states, brick by brick, right? More rights, more fundamental rights. And how it's being received on the ground is that people are struggling. It's hard to think about how democracy and representation really impacts you when it's hard to pay for gas, right? When it's hard to, buy groceries, when it's hard to deal with daycare, when you're losing your job, as 600,000 Black women have lost their jobs since this administration has taken, and there are no replacement jobs. And it's 500,000 Black men, and there are other marginalized communities that have just as stark numbers. So right now, on the ground, people are struggling just to deal with that. But what I am asking folks is to understand that while voting is not the only way that we transform this country, right? It is certainly a very transformative process that you should engage in. So when you're thinking about the election this year, when you're thinking about the ballot, yes, think about your wallet, right? Think about your job, think about your community and what it needs, but also think about what is it that you want? Because you asked the question, right? What do you want in this country, right? And I feel like if we're going to go there, let's go there. If we're going to go for amendments, we should think about, do we need a new constitution? People brag that this is 250 years and we celebrate that this year, right? But it's one of the oldest constitutions in the world and has been changed very little, even though many of the people on this screen were not imagined as citizens in it. So how do we begin the process of thinking about what does privacy rights look like? Should education be a right because it's not right now, right? Do we want to put the environment in our Constitution? Do we want to put marriage? Do we want to state our privacy rights more specifically? Do we want to spell out what type of, access to military and weapons do we really want What's our values? Those are the kind of things that we got to start thinking about. And we got to imagine ourselves, my close friend says, Latasha, as new founders
I love that. We
of
talk about that a
something
lot here
new.
too. Yeah,
you
we
know
need something
and so we
new.
got to start having those kinds of conversations. Yes, legislation is important. It's important, but we need to be a part. We, those who were marginalized, not considered the citizens of this country, need to play a part in drafting the constitution of this country. So let's start having those kinds of discussions so that we can create the nation that we need and that the world needs, because it's not just here, right? The world needs us to be better. Look what's happening around right now. And so we need to begin to think like that so that we can create a nation that truly expresses our values. So that's what I want to see. And that is what we are hearing on the ground and what we are fighting for right now.
Thank you. You, as T said in the comments tomorrow, she's like, April, you took us to church. And like that was, I saw that coming through and it was so perfect. Like, truly, thank you for that passion. And I agree. Everyone on the screen here, Abigail Adams was saying, remember the ladies as they were drafting the Constitution. Did they remember the ladies? No, they did not. We need to do something different for this next 250 plus years. We can't keep going like this. And I think for our audience, for our community, for everyone who's listening, how can we come together? Like, what are the actions that we can take? We have a Women's Power Collaborative where we try and connect on things. How can we build a stronger coalition as women who want to see these changes? We have the power here to do that. And so I think that is something we should be focused on as well, building off of April, because we can vote, but we also need to reimagine. And how do we reimagine together? So April, more to come. We're going to collaborate and figure out how we can continue to collaborate together to make that a reality. Um, and so Delegate Price, any thoughts on that? What are you hearing on the ground? I know April had to hop, but what are you hearing in Virginia? What can people do? Obviously vote, but any other thoughts?
No, I think, I mean, April just covered so much, so I'm just trying to see if there was anything I would add. But yeah, in Virginia, we are going through a special election right now. So there are people from all over the country that are watching what's going to happen in Virginia. So wherever you are, because I'm guessing this is probably C3, wherever you are along the spectrum, you can be helping out the side that you support and making calls from wherever you are. So that's something that's important. But I think in Virginia, under the previous governor, we saw voter list purges 2 weeks before an election. We saw this proof of citizenship, kind of like a mini SAVE Act that they tried to do through the administration. And really what all the executive branch could try to do, even though there were pro-democracy majorities in the House and the Senate. And so they couldn't go as far as they wanted. And then this new governor, the first woman governor that Virginia has ever had, luckily is pro-democracy. And so a lot of the work that the Commissioner of Elections is doing, that the Secretary of Administration and the Secretary of Commonwealth, both women, what they are able to do, even though I'm going to pass new bills, because I'm going to pass democracy bills,
Yes,
it
you
really
are.
isn't protecting Virginia from them, because they don't intend to do voter purges 2 weeks before an election, right? But it would be in place. But that's the legislative side. I just want to remind folks that we did not get here because of a legislator, a lawyer, and an executive director, or we didn't get here because we sat in a room and just came up with big ideas. That did happen, but then we had people doing protests, marches, and postcard writing. I mean, it was just everything that you can think of, and that built the political pressure, because for either party, any of the parties that exist, you cannot assume that they're going to automatically do the right thing, right? And so it has to be the people pressure on the outside that makes me do my job, that is holding me accountable, not just voting for me, but voting for me and calling my office to check in on what I'm up to, and following my social media to make sure that I told the truth when I was on the campaign trail. Like, you can't just say, yes, I'll support you. Here's my $5, and then act like nothing ever, exists after that. I think also supporting organizations that are doing the work. So if you have a few extra dollars, making sure that you're contributing to the folks that are educating, that are convening, that are protesting, all of that. I think that is important in what we've seen happen in Virginia, but what we've also seen kind of combat it. And I'll just say, one of the most beautiful days as chair of privileges and elections was sitting on the dais and looking out. And it was the day that we were trying to do some of the democracy bills. The room was full with regular people, just everyday voters that just wanted to make sure that they were heard. And that is the most beautiful, I guess, intersection of my job and the community. And so more of that, please. More of that.
Yes, more of that. I so agree. And thank you for giving those other ways that people can get involved. I think one of the biggest questions we have is, how do we get involved? What are the steps that we can take? So giving those action items is just really helpful. So thank you. And Yael, one thing I would say is, a lot of people, we hear like, what are we supposed to do about the courts, right? I have definitely stood in front of the Supreme Court when they're making a decision. My standing outside is not actually really doing anything. So what, from your perspective, can we do to make a difference from your legal perspective?
I think that similar to what Delegate Price was describing of what happens when the people pack the state capitals, or the county commission hearings or the city council meetings, right? That's where decisions are being made about the situation of data centers, right? So we need to be involved at every level, including the hyper local. And if you don't have the bandwidth to be involved, that there's an organizer that maybe doesn't have the bandwidth, but is making the bandwidth, and just support them, right? Like, there's so many times when people, and they're usually women, feel like they're holding it all. If you can't be the person that holds it all, like, help them carry the burden and go and work with them. But I think that, similar to the idea of people coming out, is coming out to court. I mean, I can't tell you how many public interest cases I've had where the courtroom is packed, right? Because people are invested in what's happening. And actually, Alana, being outside of the Supreme Court does make a difference. And being outside
That makes me feel better.
being outside of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, or it showing up makes such a difference, in whatever form you're able to do it. But I think that on the court side, also taking that to the courthouse steps, outside or inside, participating as an amicus party. I mean, now, I don't want to go too far into the litigation strategies, but something of that nature. And in many states, although not New Jersey, where I'm currently most situated in terms of my litigation, but in many other states, judges are elected, right? And so we have to support those elected judges, especially pro-democracy judges, because when you have the election of judges, you have the introduction of money in politics, which also allows for misinformation and disinformation. And I'm specifically thinking, for example, of the recent race of North Carolina Supreme Court incumbent Justice Allison Riggs, who ran and had a huge disinformation campaign launched against her, right? And these disinformation campaigns can be very insidious. There's an organization called Alliance for Justice that's done a lot of work to research how to protect the state courts. The state courts, I mean, we have so much attention on the federal courts, but most of the decisions that are made when normal people go to court is in the state courts. It's like 97%. It's like an outsized number. So we have to make sure that we're also building a really proficient bench of eligible attorneys to be advanced to those state courts, as well as the federal courts. And that's like, there's different approaches to that, to how to accomplish that. But I'll give you one example, also out of North Carolina. In North Carolina, a few years ago, somebody here might recall, Sherry Beasley was running for the Supreme Court. She was going to be the first Black woman to run for the North Carolina State Supreme Court. If I recall correctly, she was also a Congresswoman. So very vetted, very accomplished woman running for the bench. That decision, that state Supreme Court race was secured by, she lost that election by such a narrow number of votes, right? If I recall, and I have this published somewhere, I've written about it, but it was something like 300 votes. It was something ridiculous. And if you just zoomed in, like I do a lot of work with people of all kinds of stripes, but especially with young voters, if you zoomed in on the provisional ballots that were needlessly rejected in a single county, in Durham County, it would have closed the margin, you know? Wow. And those votes were actually predominantly Black youth voters coming from the HBCU there. So we really have to work, and look at access to the ballot in a very holistic way. And this determines, how we shape the world, right? It determines the reflectiveness of the state legislators, the local council people, and elected judges, elected high court. Those are the decisions, right? Delegate Price, when a state map gets challenged, it gets challenged and heard by the state Supreme Court, right? And so that's why the composition of those benches is so critical. And we often forget how to build the bar, how to build the bench, right? And project build future jurists. We need good jurists that are not biased, that what the term is, with no fear and no favor.
Yeah, I love that. And one other recent case that just happened, in Wisconsin, Supreme Court Justice was Chris Taylor was elected, a woman, and I pulled up one of her quotes from Weekend Reading. But when she won, she said, "People are hungry for a government that works for them. People are hungry for a judiciary that protects our rights and that affords all Wisconsinites equal justice under the law." And so that was just a recent win, and it was a landslide win. I mean, so many people turned out for that race that it is one of those examples of we can make a difference, especially in the state court. So I just
let me
thought
add to that really quickly,
yeah.
Alana. Thank you for bringing the example of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. If you look at the composition of the Wisconsin Supreme Court now, there are many, many women jurists sitting on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And it recalled, when I saw the image, I think I saw there were like 5 jurists there. And when I remembered instantly the quote by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was asked, "When will there be enough women on the bench?" And you look at decades and decades since since the beginning of the nation, where benches have been all men. We can dream of a world where a state Supreme Court bench is comprised of all women or majority women, or on the U.S. Supreme Court. We can dream of that.
And, if we keep working toward it, maybe our dream won't just be a dream, but a reality. We are seeing changes happen. So I think that it is attainable in our lifetime. Well, I know we've just hit the top of the hour, and I know you've got a lot going on in Virginia, Delegate Price. And Yael, thank you for making the time for us this evening as well. If there's any final last remarks from you both, I just want to give space for anything that maybe was burning in your minds that you haven't had a chance to say. I don't have anywhere to be, so I'm happy to stay on as long as you would like.
I think, just because I'm not sure of the age of the participants, I think something that's resonated when I've been speaking with some of the younger folks, not quite sure how to tap in, where to tap in. I really want people to know that you can enter into movement work exactly who you are, exactly where you are. You don't have to be a specific type of person. And so I think back to the civil rights, and my parents and my grandparents would tell me, like, there were doctors, lawyers that were taking the court cases, like going with the NAACP and trying to integrate, boardrooms and surgery rooms and emergency departments. But it was also the photographer and the poet and the writer that captured that, so we know what the story is. And so whatever lane you can imagine that you can authentically and genuinely portray, or be in, exist in, and navigate, do that, but do something. The time where we could just stay on Twitter and argue with bots that we don't even know if they're real anymore. Like there's nothing in to me, there's nothing in the comment section of a post that's going to change the world. But joining together and doing all that we can is really where it's going to get done. And so I just want to say thank you again for having us be a part of it. If anybody ever wants to know more about the story of the Voting Rights Act of Virginia, please reach out. But we're just getting started in Virginia. I think we have a long way to go too.
Oh, well, we love to hear you're just getting started. We love supporting you in these efforts. And so I'm excited to connect further. And if there are any additional updates that you want us to share with our audience, please feel free to always send them along and we'll pass them out to make sure that our community is getting them. But this is just the beginning of a conversation, I am sure. And anything else before I let you go, Yael?
The only thing that I'll plug, and this was such a treat to be in conversation with you all and see the chat firing up, and for us all to be, in collaboration together. I just want to share that tomorrow I'm going to be launching a national summer undergraduate course with a training component, and it'll be focused on teaching voting rights and democracy, not just learning, not just knowledge, but skills training. And so we are trying to attract a wide variety of young people from across the country. So I just wanted to share that. I dropped a link here as well. I'll pop it back in here. And tomorrow it'll be more widely dispersed. I think this is probably the first venue in which it's been announced or shared. So
We just got
thank
the
you.
pre-announcement. So
Yes.
we will also share that out with everyone. And so if you are listening still on here and you're part of a community that you think people would love to look at this, please also share to your networks as well. That's how we make change. So on that note, thank you so much for being with us. Represent Women is so grateful to have you in this conversation and to have you as fellow women doing important work. And we will definitely be in touch for another conversation soon. And to everyone in the audience, thank you for listening to this presentation, to this great conversation, for your questions. More to come from me in an email with all this follow-up, so it's all in one place. So with that, have a great night, everyone.